So setting up your meeting for Facebook Live. It's done, redirecting. And did it go live?
Yeah, it's live. I can see it on the page.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. All right, so let me come back to Zoom and hit record. We're live. Welcome, 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 everyone. I should actually bring it up on my phone as well. Welcome, everyone, to the premiere of the Big O Livestream Show. I'm Katrina Ifill, sensual empowerment leader and the creatrix of Orgasmic Intelligence. And just to give you a little insight of what the Big O is about. So we're bringing this, it's a 6-part weekly series, which we'll delve into and we'll discuss and we'll uncover everything orgasmic regarding our sexuality, sensuality, and pleasure. And as host, I will be pushing the envelope because I am a disruptor. So I'll be disrupting cultural norms and addressing many myths and taboos. So if you have an issue with anything sexual and you want to join us for the show, we welcome you. But please, this is a sex positive show. We are dealing with everything positive and we will not tolerate any negative comments or questions, queries. We just want to keep it orgasmic. And when we say orgasmic, you know what orgasmic means. We want to keep it nice. Okay, so I'm going to be inviting guests I'm from Barbados. So we're going to be inviting guests from around the region and internationally who tend to upset the status quo and are defying boundaries. And our first guest, so very happy to have him, is Habeeb Akande. And I chose him to be on the show as our first guest because of his book, Kunyaza, The Secret to Female Pleasure. Yes, and so let me just give you a little bit about Habeeb Akande. He's a sexual well-being educator and author of 6 books, including the Amazon bestseller, which we're going to be discussing, which is the core of what we're going to be discussing, Kunyaza, The Secret to Female Pleasure. Habeeb leads workshops, seminars, and panel discussions on female sexuality, emotional intimacy, and African erotology. Erotology, is that how you pronounce it? We pronounce it in Barbados erotology, right? Erotology, and which is the art of lovemaking. Based in UK, Habeeb has facilitated sex workshops in France, Brazil, the UK, and the United States, and hopefully we'll be able to say, and Barbados soon, by next year when everything settles. And Habeeb, he's on a mission to close the orgasm gap and teach people how to be sexually satisfied. Welcome, Habeeb, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, Katrina. How are you? You look lovely tonight.
Thank you so very much. I'm channeling Kunyaza.
The elegant look.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. Habeeb, thank you so much for joining because I know you're based in the UK and it's like in the wee hours in the morning over there. So I really appreciate it. So we're just going to get straight into it. First, for our listening audience, define Kunyaza.
Okay, so Kunyaza is an Asian African technique, originally from Rwanda and East Central Africa. In a nutshell, the technique is, or the sexual practice is a practice to facilitate female ejaculation, also known as squirting, and multiple orgasms in women during heterosexual encounters. The technique involves a man using his male member, i.e. his penis, to stimulate the clitoris and the labia minora in the form of a tapping or stroking technique in order to elicit ejaculation and or squirting. And that's basically the simple Kunyaza. There's a more complex or advanced Kunyaza method, which involves the tapping technique, as well as some deep, slow thrusting of the penis into the vagina. And again, the whole point, although Kunyaza is known, has got a reputation for facilitating squirting, the primary purpose of Kunyaza is female pleasure. So it's a female pleasure positive technique, which again it's known as the Africa's secret to female pleasure, and it's widely practiced in East Central Africa, and now it's commonly practiced in parts of West Africa as well. So Kunyaza refers to the technique, and Kunyara refers to the gush which emanates from the woman's urethra. So Kunyara refers to like squirting or ejaculation, and Kunyaza refers to the actual technique itself.
Okay, so you mentioned kunyara, so that's what I want to talk about, because in the book, the definition of kunyara is urine. And you know, in the West especially, there's this huge debate as to whether it's urine, or we call it pee. You know, is it pee? Is it what is it? What is it? So when you liken it to kunyara, which is the definition of urine, now in the West, and I can hear some of my listeners, I could hear the fellas out there saying, you see, I know it's pee, but we want to make, what do you say it is? Before I put my 2 cents in.
Yeah. So kunyara or female ejaculation squirting is not pee. I'll say that again, it's not pee, it's not urine. And I think, unfortunately, and the reason why I wanted to speak about or write a book about Kunyaza was because this is a culture, in an Asian African culture, which celebrates not only female sexuality, but female fluids, as in female ejaculation. And it wasn't something that they looked at Kunyara as something which was urine, and they didn't shame women for they didn't shame women for enabling them to fulfill their sexual potential. I think in the West, unfortunately, because of porn and because of a lot of stigma attached to female ejaculation, people have this perception that female ejaculation is urine. And because of a number of porn performers, when they gush this liquid, a number of them are urinating. So there's a lot of misconceptions that people have about female ejaculation, squirting, and thinking that it's urine. Now, any man who's been with a woman who has ejaculated or squirts, he will know the difference between female ejaculation and urine. And likewise, women as well. I think most women who have actually ejaculated, they know the difference. It looks differently. It looks different from urine. It smells different from urine, and it tastes different from urine. So it's something that those who know, and those who don't know are in the dark, kind of thing. But I just think one of the issues with female ejaculation is that a number of women and men as well, because of what we've been taught in Western popular culture, women who during sexual stimulation, whether it's by themselves or with a partner, are at the point where they're about to ejaculate, they hold back because they think it's urine. So that's why a lot of women aren't able to fully enjoy their sexual experience, because what they've been told, unfortunately, a lot of the miseducation is that this is something which is urine, this is something that's going to mess up the bed sheets, and it's something, unfortunately, they think is disgusting incorrectly, and they're not able to fully enjoy themselves in the bedroom. And I think men we don't help women in this regard to fully express themselves in the bedroom. So that's why I think it's important that we demystify some of these misconceptions and these myths about female sexuality and female ejaculation. And I mean, for me, I personally do not need studies to tell me what is ejaculation and what is urine, but there are studies that have been conducted recently which show that female ejaculation is not urine, but I don't need a Western study to kind of tell me that. The same way, and I always say to men, when you ejaculate, if someone were to say when you ejaculate, that's urine, you would say, of course it's not urine, because you know the difference between the two.
Yeah.
You know the different experiences. Why is it then you're trying to invalidate when women are telling you that this is an experience that is not the same as urine? Now, for women who haven't experienced ejaculation or squirting, from what I've been told and speaking to a number of women, the feeling that they have just before ejaculation or squirting is similar to when they're about to urinate. And that's why some women who haven't actually ejaculated are unable to tell the difference between the two. But in terms of where the fluid emanates from the urethra, because that's the same hole as where they urinate from, that's why some people mistakenly think it's the same as urine when it's not. So I think it's important that first and foremost, we clear that misunderstanding, that it's not urine. And secondly, I think we should create a culture and a space where women feel empowered to fully enjoy their sexual potential, because I think that's something that a lot of women, unfortunately, are not given they don't give themselves permission to fully experience, to enjoy themselves in the bedroom. And I think men, we do play a part by kind of not allowing women to fully express themselves. So,
man, you play a big part in it. Men play a big, and I mean the patriarchy, that masculine energy, to suppress the woman, that you're to have power over her. But we as women, and this is the kind of work that I do, encouraging women to own their sexual sovereignty, to take back their power and understand that pleasure is their birthright, and not just pleasure, but blissful pleasure. So when you mentioned the fact that it's comes from urethra, so working with women, so I also work with women, coaching them in the art of orgasm, and pelvic health, on womb wellness health on the whole. But I've found that, and this is, I tell you, for me, I wasn't always able to squirt. I taught myself to squirt, and that's by doing, self exploration and whatnot. And I used to record many of these sessions. Lost a mobile device once, but what happened is that I noticed that, and this is with other clients as well, and in dealing with other, reading more and discussing with other women, that the urethra, the kunyaza, we call it the squirting, we call it amrita in tantra. It actually comes from the two paraurethral ducts are on either side of the urethra, but some of it can also come through the urethra. So in teaching women, understanding why some would come through the urethra, because the ducts themselves are actually connected to the urethra, the duct, the passage, and it can go in through that way. But primarily, it would come through the paraurethral duct. So when I break it down that way for women, then they're like, oh, okay. And then they start to look firstly, they learn another part of their anatomy, because generally we as women, we're taught about the urethra, which is the pee hole, and the vaginal opening where, if you're having sexual intercourse, or where babies come out. But then when they find out that they have other holes between their legs that are functional and therefore sexual pleasure, it just blows their minds, and it opens them up. So then I find that they're a little more open and are able to relax a bit more. But then that point what you made about the feeling of wanting to urinate, that's what stops, I would say, 90% of my clients. And so I encourage them to get a sheet, get a waterproof cover on your bed, and just relax and let it flow. And so what if you urinate the first time, that's fine, but you have to just allow it to flow, and in allowing it to flow, you gain confidence, and that's how you get better at it. Well, that's how I got better at it, working with my clients. That's how they get better at it. But Habeeb, in your book, you mentioned the fact, and I watched the documentary Sacred Waters. It speaks about the fact that women are the ones who teach other women about kunyaza, and then the women in turn teach the men how to pleasure them. So why you as a man thought it was important for you to write the book about kunyaza?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think what I'm trying to do with my book, even though, like you rightly said, Kunyaza is traditionally taught by women to other women, because I've noticed with a number of African traditions, it's kept orally and it's not documented. And given that I've written a few books before, I was looking for a book on it, and I couldn't find. I saw a couple of articles, and I was like, okay, rather than waiting for the book to be written, I thought, let me try and help, in terms of preserving this tradition, but most importantly, to center and to amplify the women who are teaching this practice and are preserving this practice. So even though, yes, as a man, I've written the book, I'm not trying to center myself as if I've quote unquote discovered it. It's about not only centering, like, which I think in the Sacred Water documentary, which is a brilliant documentary, even though it was made by a white man, but in the same thing, I think what he did, which was good, was that he centered the woman's narrative. And that's what I've tried to do with my book. And not only I didn't want to send as well one woman. I wanted to give and speak about the different women who are teaching this practice, because the problem is that when you just make it about one single person, then people can try maybe attack, or they think it's this person that's kind of created or made up this technique, when there's a number of it, there's a culture of women that are speaking about Kunyaza and about female sexual empowerment. Now, because again, like I said, in a lot of African countries nowadays, it's very, speaking about sex is now a taboo, because we've adopted a Eurocentric Victorian Christian understanding about sex and sensuality, where we consider sex to be dirty and something that you just do for procreation, as opposed to something that you enjoy for pleasure purposes. Rather than waiting for someone to kind of write this book, I thought, okay, I'm not a woman, but I'm African, so I've got some insights in terms of understanding somewhat of this practice, and I've got access to some of the people who are teaching it. So let me try and write it and then amplify and highlight the various women who are doing great work speaking about it, and then hopefully it can be a catalyst for other women, because to write and to teach and to speak about different African practices and techniques, whether they're in the African continent or outside of the African continent, like the work that you're doing. So even though, yes, I'm a man and I've put myself to kind of write about it, I've tried to not kind of put my voice in the forefront, if that makes sense. So I've tried to just document the practice, and again, to try and amplify the various Black and African women who are teaching this practice. So hopefully it can inspire other women to kind of, because I think as well, a lot of women, I mean, again, maybe this is part of my male privilege, is that it's easier, I think, for a man to speak about these kind of topics. Whereas unfortunately, if a woman were to speak about it, she might be called different names in different communities, unfortunately. And even a number of the African women who I spoke to who teach Kunyaza, they wanted to remain nameless, because again, they didn't want the spotlight to be, and that's something which, even when we look at history, there's very few women that many people know of that have contributed greatly to civilization. So that's why I think, as a man, where I can maybe use some of my privileges to kind of to highlight the women who have kind of contributed and then like doing great things kind of thing. And again, hopefully that can serve as a catalyst for other female sex educators to write other books or to carry out the different workshops and stuff that they're doing, because it's important that this tradition is preserved and it's not whitewashed, because that's something that I did notice as well. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I love in the book, that you have many quotes from various women, teachers of Kunyaza as well. So you can become certified in Kunyaza?
Yeah, so you can become certified, but even with the certification, and this is something which I'm glad you actually asked this question. How does traditionally at Western education, how someone becomes certified is that you maybe go to a university, a college, and you receive like this paper. Now, traditionally in ancient African cultures, you don't go through, you have maybe like formal training in a village or what have you. But in the West, how do you receive that information? You can't be certified because there's no like official Kunyaza school. But at the same time, there are many qualified people that can teach other women, and they don't need to be. And I think even as Black people, we don't need to receive validation from, let's say, establishments that don't respect and appreciate our culture. So rather than waiting for, and the thing is as well, you can learn Kunyaza, learn the good from it, learn that which you maybe disagree with, and in your own way, you can teach your own version of Kunyaza or your own form of sex education, which I'm sure the work that you're doing in Barbados. So I think I'll be honest, as a man generally, we don't feel like we've got this entitlement where we don't feel that we need validation from others. And I think women should a lot of women need to adopt that similar mindset, because there are a lot of women who are more than qualified to be sex educators in different, from their experiences. So rather than waiting for certification from an establishment who maybe doesn't respect our culture, you can certify yourself. That's what I would say. So in terms of certified, even in Rwanda, there isn't like certified Kunyaza teachers, but there are women obviously who've learned from other women, from other women. But there are a number of singers who've become commercial singers, and a singer is a female sex educator. And the issue with that, like with anything, when money comes into the equation, is that the practice or the teaching becomes it's not as pure.
Right, it's watered down.
So it's watered down. So, and not everything that they're saying you could argue is in the best interest of their clients. So even the quote unquote certified singers who've got the documentation, it's for commercial purposes and they're not necessarily the best teachers. Whereas those who are quote unquote not certified, they are probably some of the best Kunyaza teachers. But so that's why, in terms of like for me, I would judge it by the testimonies of people's clients. So if you've got a teacher or educator who's got a number of clients and people, and again, it's not by the numbers. I wouldn't say because someone has the most number of followers, they're necessarily the best, but go by what people have said about their teaching and whether it's effective or not. And that's how I kind of that was how I was kind of reaching out and speaking to various people in the research of my book, rather than kind of looking at, is there a list of certified Kunyaza?
Right. Okay.
Teachers, if that makes sense.
Okay. So in your research of Kunyaza touching the motherland, where you're from Rwanda?
No, I'm originally from Nigeria in West Africa. So even for myself, Kunyaza, again, obviously Nigeria is obviously in West Africa, Kunyaza, and Rwanda is in East Africa. Right. It's a new culture to me, you know, so I wasn't aware of Kunyaza up until August 2016, when a reader of one of my previous books brought it to my attention. I said, why didn't you mention Kunyaza when you speak about African sex techniques and stuff like that? And then I did my research and I was like, oh wow, this is such a fascinating practice, and the culture around it. So it's not only the practice itself, but it's a culture that is centering female pleasure, and like the onus is on the man to satisfy women. So that's why I wanted to learn more about it.
Okay, so tell me, so did you just do research? When did you have your first practical experience with Kunyaza?
Okay, so practical experience. It was shortly after. So when I found out about it in August 2016. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing is, the actual practice itself, I've done similar forms in my personal life, but I didn't call it Kunyaza. And again, even just for the benefit of no, it came naturally, because again, it's like this. The practice of a man using his penis to stimulate the clitoris, mm-hmm. and this is maybe something that I'm sure men are aware of, is that after sometimes when you've gone 1 round or 2 rounds and you're not ready to, you know, you're low on bullets, put it that way. But then obviously your female part, your lady still wants to be stimulated. Then it's like a clever way of, okay, I'm still continuing to stimulate her without me, whilst I'm recharging my batteries.
Right.
So without even realizing, I was doing some form of Kunyaza without knowing it was Kunyaza, if that makes sense. Because I knew before. You
had results, though, when you were doing it before you knew, you had results?
Not of squirting, but of orgasm.
Oh, okay.
So I knew it was effective for orgasm, but I didn't know that it was effective for ejaculation. Now, one of the reasons why I think it wasn't effective previously when I was doing it for squirting was because for me, the end result was the orgasm. I wasn't thinking too much about ejaculation. Right. And for a number of women that I was with at the time, this is going back years ago now, I'm probably going to show my age, maybe like over 10 years ago now, it was something that a lot of women probably wasn't as comfortable as I probably thought they was, in terms of, like she was talking about, to fully let go. And I think that's something that when I spoke to previous women that I was with years ago now, is that something that they didn't know they had the capacity to squirt.
Right.
To ejaculate, because every time they had that sensation, it would be like, hold on, wait, I need to go to use the bathroom. And at the time, I just thought that was normal, not realizing what was going on is that a lot of women wasn't able to fully let go because they were enjoying the experience, it was blissful. Yes. But then when they got to the point where they're about to squirt, it was actually, they think they need to urinate, not realizing what's happening to their body. So again, up until maybe when I just before I found out about Kunyaza, I just thought that was normal, that a lot of women during sex are going to need to use a bathroom, not realizing that, no, it's actually...
That was it.
So they hold back. So again, even though the practice itself, like I said, when I found out about it, it wasn't like, oh, wow, that women can squirt. It was like, oh, there was a culture around Kunyaza which facilitates and allows women to squirt because there was no stigma attached to squirting. And I think, like you said earlier, that's what prevents and that's what holds a lot of women back. So that's what I was more fascinated by, that more than anything, not the actual... The technique itself is, again, it's And this is something that as well, when I tell people, and a lot of people, they want to concentrate on the technique, but before you practice kunyaza, before a woman can actually squirt, she needs to be mentally and emotionally
Right.
prepared. And that's something that people forget about. And especially in the West, where we're very goal orientated, we just think about the results and think about, okay, if I do this tapping technique, a woman's going to squirt. But if she's not, if she doesn't trust her partner, if she's not fully relaxed, if she's not mentally prepared, it doesn't matter what you do. You can have all of the techniques in the world. She's not going to be able to fully let go and squirt squirt or like orgasm. So that's something which the psychology of female desire is more important than the actual technique of kunyaza itself. And that's something that I think a lot of people lose sight of. Like, how can you cultivate desire in your lady? How can you sustain desire? How can you, if she's lost that desire, how can you rekindle it? How can you make sure she feels at ease? That's the most important thing. But for a lot of people, that's quite boring.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's boring. They just want to know the end result. The end result is,
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why in my teachings, don't focus on the end result. Don't focus on the orgasm. Just focus on enjoying the entire,
right.
the entire space, the action, the love making, every single thing. And that's important. And I want to ask you regarding now, so you've done workshops. So you've spoken about, understanding women, the psychology. You actually speak about the psychology of female desire and Kunyaza in your book, which I, thought was beautiful. But look at the psychology now, because you've done workshops in the West and you've done workshops back at home in Africa as well too. What's the difference? Because, okay, you spoke about your earlier partners, where you be, when you're ready to, before your batteries are fully recharged, you would actually, do kunyaza at that time, but you didn't know that's what it was. How open were the women? I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm being presumptuous, but were there women in the West? Were there women that were born on the African continent? Were they open to you just tapping on their clitoris? Were they like, what is this brother doing? or because for some women, and I'm speaking for the West, of course, women in the West, it's like, it's about, if it's not penetration, then it has to be direct stimulation and not tapping. So how open were they to that topic?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think I will break it down further and not just speak about the West and Africa. So when I speak to people in the UK, when I carry workshops, and just to clarify, when I do workshops, so sometimes I do workshops solely for men and sometimes I do workshops both gendered. Now, because obviously you was asking about women. So when I'm doing workshops where there's women and I'm speaking about to people in the UK, generally the workshops I've done in the UK, women are generally a bit more reserved than they are in the US or Brazil, where people ask more questions and they kind of they want to know practicalities of it. Whereas one of the reservations that I found with a number of women in the UK when I've done workshops is that some women aren't comfortable, not only the man performing kunyaza, the tapping technique, the man going down, because they're not comfortable with the way their vulva looks like. Right. So some women have got a number of reservations because of, it's like they don't even want them to go down there. So whether it's kunyaza, whether it's oral sex, don't go down there. Just like you said, penetrative intercourse, and that's it. So for a lot of people, unfortunately, their sexual script is one of kissing, fondling, and straight intercourse. Anything other than that is like, I don't, because they're not comfortable with their partner spending time in the lower regions because they've got hang-ups of maybe the way they look, the way they smell and taste, and all the rest of it. So that's why, again, it's a case of, it's not really the technique, the tapping that you've got an issue with. It's just a man spending time down there and then focusing on their vulva. So that's one of the hang-ups I've noticed with women in the UK. In America, I've held two in America, but the women are more, and even when I speak to women online from the United States, I'm more open and kind of intrigued to find out, okay, give me the 411, tell me everything, right? So, and it's more a case of, okay, how can I get my partner to do this thing? So it's like, and this is something, and the reason why I love the Kunyaza practice is because it's something that both men and women can embrace. And I think there are a lot of women who are able to, once able to let go, are able to ejaculate or squirt or orgasm by themselves, obviously via whether it's self-exploration or via sex toys, but when a man comes into the equation, it's difficult. So that's why, obviously, with this practice is one which is a heterosexual practice, which involves both male and female participation, but you need the man to be on board. Now, when I'm sorry, you wanted to say something?
I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna let you finish. Go through. Then,
so because and because again, one of the frequent requests I've received from women is that women want to orgasm with a male partner, and Kunyaza is a practice which facilitates that. It's something that I think there's a lot of buy-in from women in the States and in Brazil, but it's a case of how can I teach my boyfriend, husband, what have you, to engage in this practice. So that's what, but then I always tell them, like with men, again, I'm generalizing here, but a lot of men were ego driven. And for us, sex is performative. Even though it probably shouldn't be, it's all about end result. So if I'm speaking to women, I'm speaking about like you said, the importance of pleasure, having a blissful experience and connecting with a partner. This sounds wonderful and great to a lot of women. If I'm speaking to men, I can't really use that same language. So it has to be squirting, multiple orgasm, like end result. Men want to know, because again, about ego, we want to know if I do X, Y, and Z, is it likely to increase the chances of her squirting? Because for a lot of men, squirting is a form of sexual applause.
Yes.
If I've done this, and the reality is, a man can't really make a woman squirt. A man can only help a woman squirt or ejaculate. It's up to the woman herself. You can help, you can create that environment, but it's not you. And that's, but again, but a lot of men, we want to feel it's us that's done this. So again, if I'm speaking to, sorry,
that's the issue that I have, because now, and I was seeing videos on YouTube where they're teaching this push button. I call it the push button technique, where you insert the finger into the vaginal canal and you just press. You press by the in the area of the G spot, and she squirts. And so this is like a performance. It's like a show thing. It's like men now, and unfortunately with, I think it's porn that made it more popular than anything else. Men are, it's the first question is like, can you squirt? Are you a squirter? So now it's like women are pressured to squirt, as opposed to the men understanding that it's a process, bringing her to pleasure, getting her to relax, and then she may squirt. But if you are like, are you squirting, or are you coming yet? So for me now it's gone in a different direction, where now is about performance, and it's a big show. So it's no longer, well, in the West, I should say, okay, it is no longer about pleasure. Squirting has become no longer about pleasure, but more a pressure for women to perform. And that's really sad.
I think it's because, unfortunately, it's mainly amongst men, but I think amongst some women as well, is that, especially in the West, how we measure it, we like to, for example, if you want to measure how great you are in the bedroom, or how great your sex life is, or how great your relationship is, it's generally done on a quantitative basis, as in when people think, oh, someone's in a long-lasting happy marriage, they will look at how many years they've been married, as if that's an indication of how successful or how great that marriage is, when there's not always a correlation with that. So if someone's been married for 15 years, that means that they've been happily married successfully married for 15 years. If a man has slept with 15 women, that means he's experiencing a bedroom, even though he could have been sleeping with 15 women and all of those women have not had an orgasm or enjoyed themselves with him. But it's something that you can measure. The same way squirting. And the thing with a lot of men, I think we have a number of insecurities, given that a lot of women are now speaking openly about how it's common for a woman to fake an orgasm during sex. So because of that, and there's no actual clear-cut way, unlike when a man ejaculates, you can know when a man ejaculates, to know when a woman orgasms. That's why now there's a lot of pressure, or a lot of men want women to squirt, because in their minds, again, it's a form of sexual applause. I know you're satisfied. Whereas an orgasm, because a lot of women can roll their eyes, pretend to shake, and all the rest of it, is I don't know if you've really climaxed or not. So that's why I think for men, that's part of the reason that, yes, sex should be about connection, it should be about mutual pleasure, but how would I know if you are really enjoying it when from listening to what a number of women are saying recently, they're saying that a lot of women lie about sex or fake orgasms. So it's insecurity that affects a lot of men. So that's why I think there's a lot of, it's not just because it's on porn, it's because, like I said, it's a form of sexual applause that validates males' masculinity. And that's why it's difficult, because again, it's something that when they're going back to their boys, or when they're thinking about how great they were in the bedroom, in their mind, a proof of that is she squirted. Or how many times she had an orgasm. And that's a problem, because again, like I said, we need to move away, which I agree with you, from a goal-orientated, performance-based approach when we're looking at sex and sexual pleasure. And looking at it more holistically and talking about pleasure being, and again, there's different ways a woman can experience pleasure, but if we're honest, how you initially attract a lot of people is the end result. And then you can then bring them in and then really educate them and say, yeah, I know you came here to hear about squirting and how to make a woman squirt, and if you do the, like you said, the finger technique, but that's not the end. That's a guiding, that's not necessarily going to work for every woman, and that's not the end result. You can have a more blissful, enjoyable, full body orgasm or climactic experience without even having an orgasm or ejaculating. And then when people understand that, and they understand in different realms of sexual pleasure and different ways as both a man and a woman can really enjoy this experience without thinking about the end result, then they can explore sex on a more full, holistic basis. But again, I think initially to grab people, they kind of need to hear the end result, because if you just say pleasure, how do you, again, it's very difficult to measure that. So as much as I understand that, and I do agree with you, we need to move to an approach where it's looking at sex as more holistic and it's pleasure-based as opposed to performative-based, that attracts people initially. And then I think once we've got their attention, then we can kind of like really educate them and move away from a quantity approach to a quality approach.
Okay, I can understand, but that just brought it into perspective for me regarding why the pressure, because that's like the evidence, and I'm glad I asked you that question and had this conversation, because I've never looked at it that way, you know. And even having conversations with men, none of the brothers have ever brought it out that way, and that makes sense. It makes sense. I'm not condoning it, but it makes sense, because it's like the evidence that she's been pleasured based on the fact that yes, we've been known, and we're very vocal now, that we fake our orgasms, and there's no way to so
a lot of men, we're listening to women, but we're not actually saying it. Like a lot of when women are speaking, like we've got insecurities and vulnerability just as much as women do, but it's because we don't vocalize it. And we put on this bravado. I think a lot of women think that men are just like, we don't think about or not concerned about all of these issues, but a lot of men do have sexual problems and sexual anxieties, but we just mask it kind of thing. And again, even if we're speaking about not only like with squirting, but like the Kama Sutra, that's an example of an Asian tradition that's been somewhat, excuse my language, bastardized. And what I mean by that is that when people think about the Kama Sutra, they just think about the sex positions, and it's about how many positions you can do, and sex is all about how many sex positions you can do, when in reality, when the book was written and the author was speaking about and he listed all of the various positions, it wasn't to enhance, like the more positions you do, it will enhance your lovemaking session. It was to facilitate people with different size genitalia. So there's some positions which is more pleasurable for a man that's got a smaller penis, and there's some that's probably more enjoyable for a man that's got and vice versa. So when he lists, and this is again, if you read the book, he explains that, but when the book was translated in the 19th century by Europeans and disseminated widely, everyone just spoke about the sex positions. And even so much so when people speaking about the Kama Sutra, it's all about how many sex positions you've done, or how long you lasted in the bedroom. And people again are looking at sex and sexual performance based on things you can measure by how many positions you've done, how long you spent in the bedroom, rather than how enjoyable the experience was. Because if you're having a conversation with your girlfriends or your guy friends, how can you explain that? It's very difficult to how great and enjoyable the experience was, but it's easy to explain it by saying, oh, we made love for an hour, 2 hours. And again, a lot of that's exaggerating, or we did 24 positions. It's easy, and then people be like, wow, or impressed, you know? So that's why, again, I think we always tend to kind of focus on like the quantity-based approach as opposed to quality-based approach.
Yeah, okay. But you didn't finish with, you did the women in the UK, the
Oh,
America,
sorry.
and
Yeah, sorry.
the African women.
Yeah, so we in I recently did a workshop with some women in Nigeria, and I think because the workshop was primarily the women were Muslim, so there were a lot of conservative and extremely conservative. There was a lot of hang-ups with allowing themselves permission to actually enjoy these experiences, because unfortunately some of the women were like, are we actually allowed to, like, isn't sex for the man? Are we allowed to kind of like, this is a practice that he's supposed to do all of this to pleasure us? For them, it was all about being a dutiful wife, and just the man has intercourse with them. And if they're able to orgasm or climax within the period of him penetrating her, praise be to God. If not, then, oh well, tough luck. So for some of the women, it was quite surprising that, wow, this is all about our pleasure. And I think that's what maybe the thing that they were kind of interested or intrigued by, was that he's doing all of this. So I don't think they had an issue with that. I've not really come across women who've had an issue with a man, you know, doing the Kunyaza practice in and of itself. It was either a case of hang-ups that they think, you know, sex is primarily for the man, or they had, like the women some women in the UK had issues with a man spending time on their genitalia, because again, they was thinking, you know, I don't, you know, so if anything, it's been amongst men that I've had more intriguing or interesting responses, because a lot of times men will be asking, I've done this for 5 minutes, how many more minutes do I need to do it? Again, time.
Yes.
I've done it, yeah. Can I go in? How many strokes? It's always like, okay, it's not working. And it's, and when I'm saying practice, yes, it's a formula. So with a lot of the men, it's like, I've done the Kunyaza, like you said, I've read your book, but she didn't orgasm straight away. She didn't climax. How long is it not working? Is something wrong with her? It's like, no. And it's a lot of the unlearning that men need to do. No, concentrate on pleasure. Do not concentrate on the end result. If she ejaculates, if she squirts, so be it. If she does, if she orgasms, so be it. But that shouldn't be and don't put pressure on her. And there's a number, so that's where it's kind of like, I've had more, like I said, interesting questions from men, because again, they're thinking so much about the goal. Whereas with the women, it's like, oh, even if I don't squirt, at least this is a practice where my partner is going to be spending time pleasuring me.
Right. And I think it's beautiful that women, now with men would pick up your book, Habeeb, and they will just jump to the technique, how to.
Yes.
The woman will read the book from cover to cover and get a more holistic perspective of the practice. And the thing about it then, for her to teach, and that's where the culture of it really is, for the woman to teach her lover, her husband, her partner, how to bring her to pleasure. I don't even want to say climax, but just how to pleasure her. And what I find women have an issue with is touching their own bodies. So you've seen women in UK who have issue with a man going down on her, because they're, you know, they've been taught to, that down there is ugly, is not to be looked at, you know. But I found that women are afraid to touch their bodies, explore their bodies. And I don't know if you're aware, but the female condom was never a huge success, because women were afraid to actually touch themselves and insert it into the vaginal canal. And we women still have hang-ups of touching ourselves, of exploring ourselves, because if you are not aware of, and so, okay, so she may read the book, Kunyaza, get the technique down pat and whatnot, but if she does not pleasure herself to the point to understand where, because it may be tapping on further down on the clitoral glands for one woman, another woman, it may be higher up on the clitoral. So you still have to know your erogenous spots. And so that's what I really try to help women to own their sexuality, to own their sexual pleasure and understand that in pleasing yourself, you're able to guide your partner on how to please you.
Mm.
Right. But one thing you spoke about, and I'm glad you spoke about no, let me ask this question first. So we're aware now the world is a little more diverse, and we have the sexual spectrum. And so in your book, you speak about heterosexual encounters, but we're aware that we have, same-sex partners and whatnot. How would you, or would it be the same technique that you would teach to, let's say, two women having a sexual encounter? Are you able to teach it? That I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. I'll be honest. Most of my work is focused on heterosexual couples, so I have not had an experience with same-sex couples, so I can't really speak on that.
Right.
And again, the reason why it's difficult to speak on same-sex couples is because, so for example, like the question you asked about two women, because the Kunyaza technique involves, I mean, again, obviously with the pain, like obviously it's not, if you're just thinking about the technique of stimulating a clitoris,
Mhm.
that can be done with anything, whether it's a dildo or what have you, a penis.
Mhm.
But if you're speaking about Kunyaza itself, and obviously it involves, and it's teaching the man to be patient, obviously if there's a female partner, that's not going to be the same, because she has to, obviously because she hasn't got a penis it's like, can you teach, if for example you've got a technique that involves delayed ejaculation or semen retention, you can't teach that to two women.
Right.
Do you understand?
Yes, I
So
understand.
that's why the practice itself, and again, even how I've been for my research and how it's like part of the practice, if you're focusing on just female pleasure, then obviously that can involve two women.
Right.
But if you're speaking about Kunyaza itself, and I'm understanding how it's taught, it involves a penis and a clitoris.
Mhm.
So that's why, again, I haven't, and I'll be honest, I haven't done any workshops with same-sex relations. So that's why
Are you open
it's
to
not.
it?
Sorry.
If you were to get a request, would you be open to doing a workshop, facilitating a workshop?
Would that for two?
The same sex, yes. The
I'll
same.
need to think about it, because the reason I need to think about it is because if I'm teaching the tradition how it was taught to me, then
Mhm.
if I'm going to do facilitating for same-sex relations, then it's an adaptation of Kunyaza.
Right.
It's not
Oh, okay.
Kunyaza.
Okay.
Did you understand what I mean?
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
so,
I understand.
so that's why, because again, even when I'm speaking about Kunyaza, when I've done the research, it's like, this is what the man needs to do. This is like, because again, what a lot of men struggle with is, in terms of their performance anxieties, is how to last long in the bedroom. They ejaculate too quickly. So it teaches them, as much as there's a lot of benefit to women, the benefit again to men is that this is how you're able to last long in the bedroom, or to not ejaculate so quickly. So that's, there's two sides to it. And the
Right.
sensations that a man feels by using obviously the penis glands, he's getting to sensation as well.
As
So
well.
he's not only enjoying, so as much as obviously it's focused on female pleasure, because the man's using the head of his penis, he's getting a slight sensation, and obviously he should be enjoying how his partner is being gratified and enjoying the pleasure. So there's a two-way process.
Right. So he's learning how to
He's
increase his stamina, and
right.
also at the same time
How
please
to
his partner.
right, and he's also learning delayed gratification,
Right.
because
Yes.
even though it's the top of the penis, which is the most sensitive part, he's not, because again he's fully in control and he's not obviously engaging in penetrative intercourse. He's learning that he can get to the point of, near the point of no return, but still not ejaculate.
Not
So there's a lot of things, and that's something that when I was teaching primarily men, I'll focus on that. Yes, it's your pleasuring your female partner, but these are the benefits for you. These are how you can learn your body, because as much as a lot of work needs to be done, which you've mentioned earlier about teaching women to enjoy themselves and how to enjoy pleasure, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of men, in terms of how to control themselves in the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And how to fully enjoy pleasure, because of what a lot of men have seen from porn, the jackhammer approach is all about being fast, powerful, and going straight to orgasm. Whereas if they can prolong their pleasure, not for the sake of, lasting X amount of minutes, but then for the sake of prolonging the experience, then you can have a heightened sense of sensation. And that's why, again, when I'm teaching Kunyaza to the men, that comes part of it. Now, obviously, if it's a same-sex relation, that's not the same, because if a one woman is using like a dildo, you're not effectively teaching Kunyaza, you're teaching something else. It's like an adaptation. So that's why, again, to pay, if I'm going to pay full respect and homage to Kunyaza, how it's taught, I can't teach it into same-sex couples. And that's something which, again, I've not been, because I've been asked that question a number of times, and it's a thing where, rather than, because again, it's not my tradition. I can teach adaptation, or people can teach adaptation if they want. Yes. But for me to say this is Kunyaza and then apply it to something else when I was taught, I'm teaching something totally different.
Yeah, I can understand that. Fully respect that. But I'm sure that there are people who are teaching that adaptation out there. Yeah. But you mentioned, and this is something I want to talk about just briefly, because of religion and sex. Religion and sex. We know that in religion, sex is suppressed. It's seen as a taboo. It's only done for procreation. And you have a book, A Taste of Honey, Sexuality and Erotology in Islam. And here in Barbados, we have a very large Islamic community, and working with some women, as you mentioned in the workshop, when the women, they thought that, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to get pleasure from sexual intercourse. I'm supposed to have pleasure as well. It's a shock. What brought you to write that particular book?
Okay, so when so obviously I am a Muslim. When I after I graduated from university, I spent some time in Egypt, in North Africa, and I came across I was studying Islamic law and Islamic history, and I was obviously learning Arabic, and I came across a number of books that were written in the 15th century by Muslim religious scholars about sex and the art of pleasure and the importance of men pleasuring their wives. And I was quite surprised by this, because you don't really hear many books by religious people speaking about sex and sex being, or religion being, sex positive. And then what I realized as well, and that's why I wanted to highlight this, is that when people think about religion, or like you mentioned earlier, when they speak about religion being, or sex being taboo or not being sex positive, the question is, which religion are you speaking about? And the question, and then another question is, are you speaking about religion or people's understanding of that religion? There's a difference. Yeah, so generally, when people speak about, or like, sex as being for procreation, now from an Islamic perspective, sex is not for procreation purposes only. It's for pleasure purposes and procreation purposes. Now, if the understanding of a number of Muslims is that it's just for procreation, that's something totally different. So there's a disconnect between how a number of Muslims understand sex and what the religion actually teaches about sex. So a lot of Muslims understanding, they've adopted, like, since much of how when Africa was colonized by much of the European world, when a lot of Muslim countries were colonized by the Western European world, they adopted a Victorian Christian understanding about sex being, it's just for procreation purposes, it's something that's dirty, it's just shameful. Whereas in a lot of early Muslim communities, from the 9th century up until like the 18th century, they spoke about sex as being an act that is a pleasurable act, is for obviously within the confines of marriage. It's an act which a woman is equally entitled to sexual gratification just as much as a man is, and the onus is on the man to satisfy his wife before he's even satisfied. So the concept and understanding we have of religion being it's for procreation. Now, in some religions, like I know in Catholicism, that's the case. So sex is generally seen as for procreation purposes. In Islam, it's not. So, or even Hinduism, it's not. So when people think about the Kama Sutra, it's a religious textbook. But when people think about religion, generally, a lot of people, they think about Christianity. And Christianity's understanding about sex is very different from other religions. So that's why I wanted to highlight that. And then again, speak about and raise the awareness of the contributions that many Muslims of, like I said, dating back to the 9th century, have written about sex and, the religion being sex positive and pleasure positive, and the different ways that a man can satisfy his wife in the different ways a wife can satisfy her husband, because a lot of people believe, unfortunately, that sex is just something that you do for procreation purposes. You can't really have an environment where you speak about sex, and a lot of these are cultural understandings about sex. So that's why with erotology, which is the study of erotology, derived from the Greek word eros, meaning desire. It's the study of desire and the art of lovemaking. So it's a study of sex. And the early Muslim erotologists, they served as, you could say, the social sex commentators, where they spoke about different practices, both sex within the confines of marriage, outside of marriage, same-sex relations, different talks. They were speaking about so many things that it will surprise a lot of Muslims today. So even if, like, so something like Cardi B's recent song, WAP, that was nothing compared to the early Muslim poetry when they spoke about sex. So that's something which, again, I wanted to highlight. And then again, so yeah, so because again, I think people need to be empowered, especially within Muslim communities, where unfortunately there are a number of Muslims, both men and women, who are sexually so they've suppressed their sexual desires, and they've not, and a lot of it is from cultural baggage. So that's why I wanted to again raise awareness and highlight the contributions that many Muslim sexologists or erotologists have made towards sex and sexual studies. Because again, we generally hear things as if, even when you read the history about sexual studies or sex science, it started in the Western world with first Aristotle maybe speaking about sex, then Albert Kinsey in the 50s, 60s speaking about sex, and then the sexual revolution in the 1960s. So again, it's a very Eurocentric.
Yes.
And that's a problem. So you don't really hear the sexual stories about people outside of Europe. And even the Kama Sutra, the reason why it's known in the West is because it was translated by a British person in the 19th century, when there was other sex books written in ancient China, North Africa, and other parts of the world, but we don't hear about those different histories. So that's why, again, I just think it's important that history didn't begin with what white Europeans have told us. So that's why, again, there's things that people will agree with, there's things that people will disagree with, but I think it's important that we hear different narratives and histories about, and again, it will challenge our understanding. So even when we say things like religion, what religion are we speaking about? So when we say that religion, sex is taboo in religion, I'll say, what religion are you speaking about?
Speaking about,
when
right?
People, when people say, sex is just for procreation in religion, again, which religion are you speaking about?
Yes, be specific.
Religious people, be specific. Religious people are sexually oppressed. Which religious people are you speaking about? So as a Muslim that is of Nigerian descent, I had no issue speaking about sex with a number of my older cousins or uncles. Now, I know that not a lot of Muslims have had that similar experience. So for me, it wasn't taboo to speak about sex. But I know in many other Muslim communities, they didn't maybe have that safe space. So again, everyone is different. And that's why I just think, rather than generalize religion, which we tend to do, I think it's important that we highlight other voices or other disruptive voices within people that are committed to their faith, or even some people who are challenging it for different reasons, because we don't really hear that enough of.
Yes, I agree 100%. And you've given me an idea of I come from a Christian background from a child, and in my adult age, I joined the Rastafari faith, and so sex and understanding sexuality in Rastafari faith is a little different. And so I'm thinking, the only thing about it is that looking at the historical aspect of it, maybe I have to bring it back to the continent, but you're giving me ideas for books. I remember, as I told you before we started, that you posted last week about your you put a challenge out there, really, to just write your book. Don't worry about the critics, don't worry about what people say. Once you speak from your truth, go ahead. And that was something that I needed, because I've been delaying finishing my book, and I definitely will put some more passion into it and get it. But the work that you're doing, though, Habeeb, I really want to thank you as a man. And I know I will have some viewers who would say, men have no right speaking about or teaching female sexuality. But the work that you're doing, and how you came here today and you express why you're doing it and how you go about doing it, I want to thank you, commend you, continue to do your work, and hopefully in 2021 we can arrange to see if we can have a Barbados leg of your workshops here.
Well, I'm hoping. I don't want to put pressure on you, but I'm hoping that by 2021 we have your book out because, like I said, it's important that we have. And I'm glad you've got people saying it. Why is it a man? Is because there's women. There's many women that are more than qualified to speak about this topic, like yourself. But we need to have more books written by women and Black women in particular. So, not to put pressure on you, which I'm going to, but I'm waiting for your book to come out. And again, just like I said before, when we spoke off camera, don't wait for validation from others. You don't need validation from no man to write your own book and your own experience. You don't need validation from people outside of your culture, people that understand where you're coming from. And you've got your own unique experiences that will resonate with people. So again, coming from a Christian background and then going into Rastafarianism, and speaking to different people, you've got your own insights and perspectives that I'm sure will make a great book. So rather than waiting for again, someone to certify you or validate you or say that you're qualified, you're more than qualified with the work that you're doing. And again, I'm hoping and waiting for your book to come out. And again, just put it out there because again, the world needs it. And again, it'll resonate with people more than you probably realize. So that's what I would say on that regard. And keep doing the work that you're doing, like I said, because like I said, you don't know where you're going to be a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. But at least if you can put something out there, and if it's good, if it's documented, whether it's in the form of like videos like this or something that's down in writing, hopefully it'll be something that can benefit for people to come 10, 15, 100 years, 200 years from now. So you want to leave like a lasting legacy. So please keep doing what you're doing and know that you can benefit people more than you would realize.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. So before we go, I want you to just share your information where we can find your book, what we're speaking about specifically, but I know you have 5 other books as well. So you can let us know where to find them.
Yeah, so my books are available on Amazon, amazon.com, and also on my website, rabah.com. That's RABAAH.com/store, STORE. Again, or like I said, you can find me on Instagram, Habeeb, HABEEB _Akande, AKANDE.
So he's on IG, he's on Facebook, he has his own website, and you can go on Amazon. Thank you so very much, Habeeb. It's been a pleasure. I'd like to thank all our viewers, those who are watching it live. We don't have any questions. I don't know, do we have any questions? I was going to give them a couple minutes, but we're out of time. I really should have mentioned it earlier to give them a chance to send the questions, but it's been a pleasure. Thank you. But feel free, the live I'm going to keep the replay up. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in the comment section, inbox me. Feel free to inbox Habeeb as well. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Habeeb. So that comes to the end of the premiere edition of the Big O live stream. See you again next week when we have more juicy topics to disrupt. We actually discuss and disrupt. And we're going to be talking to Onika. She is from in the region, and Trinidad. She's a trained sexologist, and she'll be speaking about her TED Talk, how we understand our sexuality through the carnival, which is that dancing and flair, and yeah, so that's going to be pretty exciting. So I hope you join as well, Happy.
I will do. I'll make sure I'll share it. So keep up the good work, and thank you again for inviting me, Katrina, and much blessings to you.
Thank you so very much. Okay, everyone. All right, take care. And remember, you all are orgasmic naturally. Okay. I'm coming off. Okay, so this is where I'm kind of lost now. Did I stop it? No, it's still on Facebook.